Now, one of the things that you're probably noticing is that macros run really fast. And so if something doesn't go as expected, well, how do we deal with that? There is a means by which we can step through the macro one line of code at a time. And so this is particularly beneficial if we have two screens, but I'll show you how we can improvise and get by on a single screen. And so normally when we run the macro, it runs instantaneously, and a lot of your initial macros are going to be real short. So within the blink of an eye, all of a sudden everything's done. You're like, well, what do I do? So if we want to troubleshoot our macro, what we can do is click anywhere inside the macro. Step 2, we'll click on the Debug menu. And then step 3, the main reason we're clicking on Debug is so that we can get to the Step Into command. But rather than clicking on Step Into, what I want you to memorize if you're going to be debugging macros is the F8 key. So the F8 key allows you to advance to the next line of code. What you will not want to do, I promise you'll find out real quick, is keep clicking on Debug and Step Into for every line of code. It's going to make your wrist fall off. So the F8 key is going to give you an easier way to step through your code. And when we step through our code, each line turns yellow and the macro pauses. So when we press F8, then it moves to the next line. And so we'll find that when we get to our input box, we can type in our amount, we can click OK. As we're stepping through the code, if we want to hover over a variable name, we can see what's inside it. So this lets us kind of slow the process down and make sure that we see what's going on and then tighten up our code if needed. Now, what is easy to occur is for us to be stepping through our code, figure out our problem, switch over to Excel, fix the problem, try to run the macro again, and Excel will then say, can't execute code in break mode. So what break mode means is that you already have an existing macro running. So whenever we're stepping through the macro, if we don't get to the end, we need to stop and reset the macro. So we click reset so that it doesn't leave that macro running. Because remember, the macros are going to keep running until such time that we get to the end of the code or click the reset button. So if I want to step through this particular macro, what I want to be able to do is see the Visual Basic Editor and my Excel spreadsheet at the same time. So I'm going to erase my principal cell here. I'm going to click on Visual Basic to open the editor. I'm going to take the editor and just kind of bring it down in the corner here. Notice then that if we go to the Debug menu in the Visual Basic Editor, the first choice there is called Step Into. So when we click on that, notice the first line of code turns yellow. So that's just setting an intention that the next time we press the F8 key, or if we decided to click the F5 key, which turns into a continue button now, then it would run through the rest of the macro. But if we want to go to the next line of code, we could either go back to debug and then say step into again, or we're going to find it easier to press the F8 key. So notice at this moment where it says result is empty because that line of code has not executed yet, so there's nothing yet in that variable. You hover over here, if we get to the range, notice it says range B4 is equal to 0. So that's how we can peek and see what's going on inside the worksheet. So when we press F8, that's when it executes the input box and brings that up. So here we'll put in an amount, we'll put 500. Again, this causes the macro to pause until we click OK. So now it resumes. Now we're down to the next line. So notice it skips over the comments. So we hover over result, now result says 500. So our test is going to be if result is equal to nothing, then do this. We're going to find because it does equal something, it will continue on. So we press F8. If we were to execute this next line of code, it would say on air resume next, which would turn on our error handling. So we'll come down. So here then on goal seek, we can check, okay, that's 500. And range B3, this time, there's nothing in that cell, which I think is why it's not showing me a value there. And then when we press F8, we can see on the screen that that goal seek was able to do its job. So that in this case, the message box is going to get skipped over. When we press F8, skips over that section. That's what decision making looks like in our programming code, so it just bypasses that part. If there were an error number, then it would go in there and display that message. So on error go to 0 tells it to stop skipping over errors. Exits in sub means that we want to end the routine. So we press F8, no longer says break mode in there, or it says break at the top. So now we know that macro has finished. Other things that we can do if we're stepping through a macro, if we know the first part of it's working and we know where the problem is maybe down here on the on error resume next, we can also go to the debug menu and we can say run to cursor. So that means you don't have to go tediously step through every single line of code. You can tell Excel to run to the cursor. So in this case, I've clicked in front of the on error resume next. So when I choose run to cursor, it goes ahead and does this part. I click OK, and then it pauses here. So now I'm in the vicinity where I think there might be a problem, and then I can step through this part. So the run to cursor just lets you kind of speed up your debugging process if you've got a lengthy macro and you don't feel like you want to step through every line of code over and over again. So this time, because I did introduce some bad text in there, this time it will go inside the if statement because there is an error number. And so we press F8, tells me that it's not a valid input. And so then turns off the error handling and then finishes out.